Howdy folks, Tetsu here, down in the lower tiers where the power is low, but the battles are fierce. And today I'll be delving down for a quick chat with Manat, both the participant and host of the first 7U tournament, to get some insight into their first games in round 2. Link in the description if you want to check that out. Thank you, Manat, for giving me this chance, and a shout out to the RBY 7U community for their encouragement and continued support. If you happen to enjoy the video, I humbly request you click that like button, also subscribe and click that bell if you want to be notified for later uploads. Working together, we can bring more attention to this fascinating metagame. With all that said, let's begin. Alright, let's get this started. First introductory question, when did you get into Pokemon?
My first game was Sapphire as a kid, and even at age 9 or 10 I was into old games, so I tracked down a Pokemon Red cart not long after beating the Elite Four in that game.
My first game was Silver, actually. Although that was the one I bought with my own money. I actually got Blue before that, but I mean the circumstances for that was kind of funny. It ended up leading to a really interesting situation years later. I was only roughly about 9 years old, I think, and I was able to convince a fella who was sitting right beside me, hey, since you don't play the blue version anymore, would you be willing to trade it for something? And they wanted a holographic Arcanine, which I happen to have one, and I was able to convince them, hey, can I go ahead and take this, because I want to play it when I get home, and I'll bring you the card tomorrow. They agreed, and at the end of the day, I got home after riding the bus again, and I got told by my parents, you're not going to be riding the bus anymore, and you're going to a different school. Yeah, that was a bit unfortunate. So, well, like I was saying, that led to a pretty interesting situation years later, and I mean several years later, when I actually I was working at a grocery store at the time, and ended up meeting them again. They were shopping for groceries. I didn't recognize them at first, but the first thing they said to me when they walked up to me said, "You still owe me that rare card." And it took me a moment to realize what the heck they were talking about. And then when it clicked, I bursted out laughing. I couldn't help but just laugh my ass off at that. I found it funny. I can't help it. It was quite amusing. To the point where one of my coworkers thought I'd gone completely mad. But they got their card, and they even sent a picture of it to show they put it on the mantle in a little case, which is cool, because I honestly do not know how I kept that card. Like, a lot of these stuff, because that I used to have, I don't have anymore. Like, the blue cartridge, I actually don't own anymore. I have no idea what happened to that. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a funny little story, if nothing else. So, but I think I went a little bit off topic there. Sorry. Next question. What generation is your favorite to play and compete in?
RBY is the main one I've played and competed in. I never played competitively as a kid. I like LGPE too, though. And I'll probably branch into Gen 2 to 3 soon.
That makes me wonder, what's your favorite Pokemon? Any particular reason why? A good memory, good competitive record, looks cool, etc.?
Sandshrew by a mile. My first 3D Pokemon game was LGP, which I only played a few months ago, and the moment I saw a little Sandshrew wandering around I just fell in love. I've always liked them, but seeing one in 3D really made me happy.
Sandshrew really is a cute Pokemon. I can't say I've personally liked it myself, although Ditto is superior, because it can become all Pokemon. All hail Ditto. Also Farfetch'd. Quack. Alright, memes aside though, let's move on to the next question. When did you start playing on Showdown? Favorite battle mechanic? Because it's bugged, clever, allows for comical effects, etc.
I started February of 2022. My friend Nicole was one of the people to get me into it, and I ended up seeing Gen 1 NU as a ROA ladder and going, sure, I'll play this, even though she was trying to get me into ADV. From there I got really into it, and once the ladder was over, I started playing OU and UU and was sucked into RBY entirely. Favorite mechanic is probably stat reapplication. It's such a cool and accidentally strategic feature to be able to forcibly win speed ties.
Yeah, there's one thing that each game seems to have to an extent is just the mechanic, like the very hardware that it's being used, how it's programmed, accidental or not. It's really is kind of cool to see people actually use that kind of stuff to their advantage. Now, obviously, sometimes that can that can kind of break the game in some situations, but when it doesn't, and it literally can just be used as a strategic edge, it's quite nice to see, actually. Um, oh, to the next question, this is going to be a little bit more offbeat to the usual ones. I mean, considering you hosted the actual tournament, I figured want to get a little bit of insight into that. What got you interested in 7U? How did it feel to organize a tournament for it? Could you describe what goes into such a venture?
I honestly am not totally sure. I think I just really liked NU and lower tiers in general and liked the idea of a go fast tier, so I played lots of games and eventually we got a role and channel for it, which made me think we could actually develop something here. The two existing VRs gave some ideas, but of course people hadn't explored that much yet. Organizing was really cool, of course, but I also was a newbie, so I probably caused some headaches for staff as I tried to figure out, wait, how do I actually do this and where do I put it? That said, I've organized tournaments in other games, so it wasn't that hard to figure out the logistics of the actual tour itself, just how to situate that on Smogon itself.
I really need to get Vulcan Pack in on this, because, I mean, I remember Gastily's actually mentioning that he found out about it through them since they were memeing about it. So it really is kind of cool how this has literally gone from just a really fringe idea, just a couple people playing it because they thought it would be kind of fun, and to the point where it actually had its own tournament, and obviously there's talks of even more tournaments coming. So that is a really cool situation of events. And I really hope to see 7U grow, as well as many of the other lower tiers, because if only for the extent that, so many people's favorite Pokemon aren't really viable in the higher tier, to be able to actually play them in a competitive sense, I don't know, it's just quite fascinating to me. Okay, so on to the next question. How did you feel going into the tournament? Did you have any expectations in regards to how the meta would develop?
Mostly I was just like, don't go 0 to 2, honestly. I did think Golbat was gonna rise as well as Farfetch'd, but consequently I thought Voltorb and Rhyhorn would also be top picks, which didn't hold very true into later rounds. Clef running Sing is definitely not something I expected at all, even if it only developed super late.
Okay, on to the pre-battle questions. I've only got a couple of these. So, for teams, did you use the early samples? If not, how did you go about picking your teams? What were your thoughts for each of Mon's use?
I made those samples, haha, and I apologize to people who used the Ivy or Clef lead teams I tried to make. They developed in an era that people kept trying weird ideas like anti-lead Shelder or Rhyhorn, and I was trying to give some diverse options when I should have given everyone a bunch of lead tent and called it a day. My process was pretty simple. Meowth, Char, Tent, Ivy are locked. How do I set up my last two to trade favorably based on my lead? Often the answer was Golbat or Farfetch'd, because Golbat was just great and Fetch'd always surprised people, even at the tournament start when most people ran Rhyhorn, since inevitably it would trade and die or get slept. Basically my extra 2 Mons determined my win condition and the order I would be aiming to trade down, as well as which Mon is winning the endgame for me.
Definitely a sound strategy, I would say. I mean, had I been a part of the tournament, I probably would have been pretty surprised to fetch too, because, I mean, when you think of powerful Mons, at least in Gen 1, you don't really think of Farfetch'd. as being really all that useful. I mean, even in a tier all the way down here, it is kind of surprising to see. Then again, it'd probably be more surprising to see actual Ditto do something down here. I'm sad now. But regardless, moving on to the next question. What were your thoughts going into your first match? Were you nervous, confident, excited?
Horrendously nervous. I've always had competitive nerves in every game out there. RBYPL has helped a lot with that recently, but 7U was literally the second Pokemon tournament I ever played, and the first was an OU tournament where I got Serpy for round 1 and promptly lost, so I didn't have much chance to work through the nerves. I really wanted people who had been active in developing 7U to prove that we had actually built some knowledge rather than all getting stomped in early rounds, and I think a lot of us actually made it really far. I did alright. Foz and Gangsta SpongeBob made deep losers side runs, and Juan obviously made second, to name a few, so I was very happy.
I can't wait, actually, to see the rest of their games. We've seen Foz and Gangsta SpongeBob so far in the tournament, and I can't remember if we've seen Juan yet. I don't think so. Then again, my memory's never been the best thing, but hopefully we'll be able to see all the rest of their games soon, if I can get my lazy butt and into gear and actually get the rest of them uploaded. But at any rate, as far as nerves go, yeah, probably one of the biggest reasons I've never been too competitive of an individual. Just not really my thing. But with that, let's move on to the first Game 1 question. After I get this screen up, there we go. Yeah. And click, and play. Alright. In these early rounds, we've seen everything from common Tentacool and Charm leads to mons like Ivy, Clef, and the like in this match, Kabuto. Could you give us your thoughts on the lead metagame in 7U?
It's all about Tent, really. Everything revolves around it. You have to be 70 speed or faster to cut it as a lead, and stuff like Hitmonchan works for that reason. Charmeleon being OHKO'd by Pump is pretty awful for it, but it's still usable. Golbat is good. Voltorb is not great because of Ivysaur and Rhyhorn shrugging it off. You really have to hit multiple predictions in a row for Voltorb to work. Don't use Beedrill lead, please. Hitmonchan just does it better.
I'll be honest, I've seen in the Discord that some people have said that Hitmonchan actually is a pretty decent niche lead. I haven't used it yet, and I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it. Yeah, that's definitely something I'm gonna have to play around with. So let's get on to the next question. All right. So Ajjc made the call to send in Farfetch'd into your Ivy, leading to an early nap. With sleep being a common strategy in the tier, what methods can a player use to combat it?
Well, number 1 is positioning. If you get sleep off first, you're able to sack your sleeper, and ideally you want to play early game with mons faster than Ivy, so it doesn't get in for free. The other thing is accepting it's inevitable and not trying to burn the turns, just accept that it's happening and plan how you're going to play down one mon. I think smart positioning early is all you need to get your sleep off first and apply pressure and really make your opponent pay for getting theirs off in return.
Probably one of the things I need to work on most is definitely positioning. So this is actually very sound advice, at least for my situation. Hopefully anyone listening is able to pick up the same thing as well. Alright, now on to a more to a common topic on the Discord. Confuse Ray is a move that can be aggravating to either player depending on the outcome. What are your thoughts on the move?
I don't know if it's overpowered or not in 7U, but it's certainly not competitive. I'd be willing to try the game without it.
Yeah, I mean, actually makes me wonder about Supersonic, though I think it was Beedrill Man that kind of just pointed the fact out that it probably would be even worse because, I mean, you're having to do a coin flip twice instead of just once, technically. So, yeah. So, sorry. Let me get this changed over. There we go. Alright, so speaking of Golbat, it did put in a lot of work here. Confuse Ray, threatening Kabuto with Mega Drain, and even getting that last Hyper Beam on Meowth. What are your thoughts on Golbat in the tier?
It's a really strong mon. Early on I suggested it was top 3, maybe even number 1, and I eventually settled on putting it at number 2. At the time people thought it was a bit much, but I think a lot of people saw it my way later on. It does have some big weaknesses: no stab, mono-normal attacking type barring a weak Mega Drain, but it's bulky and annoying in a tier that doesn't have much to stop it trading favorably.
I also remember you bringing up in the Discord like a little while ago how it might wind up bumping up to number 1 if the 7 Ubers Mons ended up being brought down. I love the fact that that was the name Beedrill came up with. 7 Ubers. So fun. So fun. Okay, back to the questions. Final game, 1 question. Would you mind giving us your thought process during the game? Why did you make the decisions that you did?
Mainly I was focused on getting sleep first so I could sack my Ivysaur and start using Golbat to harass their team, then try to trade in ways that stop them getting back in. For example, I sent Rhyhorn in to revenge Meowth because I knew that Ajjc had no way to switch out Kabuto, sleeping Farfetch'd, and presumably Tentacle last, so something is dying to my Rhyhorn on turn 16. It turned out to be Rhyhorn last for them, but my team beats that anyway.
Make notes, people! Which I'm currently doing myself right now. Okay, so game 2. Let me get that switched over right quick. There we go. Alright, so I asked about your thoughts on the lead metagame earlier. With that in mind, what do you think was Ajjc's thought process for using Kabuto in that role?
I would assume trying to anti-lead Char, but your best case scenario is that you hit Tent 1 time or slash an Ivysaur and give the opponent first sleep. As I said, in the early days people tried this sort of thing a lot, but I think it's not viable.
Well, speaking of Kabuto, on turn 2, Kabuto switches out after getting a good slash hit on Tent. The switch in being Ivy, then Charm, but looking at their team composition, would it have been better to let Kabuto go down and then switch into a faster Mon? What are your thoughts on Ajjc's decision there?
I think sacking Kabuto and going Charmeleon or Golbat would have been better. Even if my Surf didn't crit Ivy, I would have wrapped it and then pivoted into Charmeleon to threaten it out. Since I crit, I got to go for the Blizz kill instead and ended up leaving 3 Mons badly injured. Ivy is now in Tent range. Kabuto is OHKO'd by most non-resisted moves including Meowth Bolt, and Char dies to 2 hits from anything, which is why I went Golbat.
See, this is another reason why I'm more of a casual player. That stuff just doesn't really occur to me all that much, but considering I want to learn more about the tier, that's certainly something I'm going to have to fix. Alright. Speaking of fixing things, I do have an obsession with one move in Generation 1, and I figured I'd ask a question on it. I've seen the move Rest used a handful of times, if not even that. Gastly's also spoke on their Tentacle having Rest in round 1, although I'm curious of that being from Tent's Smogon entry for Little Cup. I digress though. Would you mind giving us your understanding of the move's lack of use?
It's hard to use a move that requires 3 turns in a tier with no passive damage, no passive recovery, and where a 2-3 HKO is the norm. I tried some weird Reflect Rest stuff in practice, but the issue is the tier has a lot of Mons with crit moves in it who will invalidate all that setup anyway, and Char is a mixed attacker, so it doesn't care much.
It's actually kind of fascinating when I think about it, because for those who are not aware, I've currently gotten into the I've currently grown an interest in making metagames, like theory crafting them, And it's kind of cool and highly fascinating that in Gen 1, rest, at least down here, obviously is just very unviable. But then you go to Gen 2, and it's not broken, but it's because of the several tools that are in the game of Gold, Silver, and Crystal, it makes rest more of a viable option. Granted, that's a lot of things with Gen 1, like how a lot of mechanics change, so different mons have different capabilities because of that. Alright, so final question for Game 2, and this is going to be a repeat of the final one for Game 1. Would you mind giving us your thought process during the game? Why did you make the decisions you did?
Simply put, after the first 3 turns I knew I was ahead, and I could pressure. I had shown 2 Mons, they had shown 5 and 9 turns, and most of their team was barely hanging outside of Meowth range, so my goal was to use Bat and Char to wear down what was left. I could afford to just hit and not think about predicts because, for example, their Ivy was barely out of Meowth range and my Ivy's Razor Leaf was enough to bring it in range. I still wanted to preserve Ivy because it sweeps their rocks plus Meowth by itself, whereas my tent was damaged, so I sacked tent to sleep. The Mega Drain click as they go Rhyhorn looks like a predict, but really, I was just seeing that their Char is in range too so I can click Mega Drain and not lose anything positioning-wise. By turn 21 everything but their Meowth is OHKO'd by Meowth and I have a fully healthy Ivysaur, Meowth, Farfetch'd, and Char plus a pretty healthy Bat, so it was pretty over. Similarly, I clicked Beam with Bat because even if they go Rhyhorn, who cares? I live a rock slide usually, and even if I die, I have 4 more Mons that each sweep most of his team. You don't have to predict when your endgame is already secure, and mine was secure even before they started switching a bunch and giving me extra hits. I basically brought Fetched out just to give it a win, there was no way to wake the sleeping Kabuto on it. Fun game, but very much a case of switch less.
Yet another thing I need to work on. But speaking of working on transition, let's head to the ending questions. How did you feel about your first match? Were there things you think you could prove on, skills that you might need to work on for later rounds?
I was very rough around the edges, but got away with it because my opponent was new to the tier, so I end up looking really good at a tier I was middling at. My biggest issue is my positioning can be lacking especially when I play from behind, but that wasn't really apparent here.
Definitely fair, definitely fair. And finally, for the last question, if you had to give an introduction to 7U, what would it be?
Welcome to the most simplified form of Pokemon, no abilities, no items, no HP, hit things. Think about what the position will be 3 turns from now. Think about what you want your endgame to look like. Stop switching so much, and simply do not get crit. It's all about positioning, and if you do it better you win, usually. And if not, that's Pokemon.
Alright folks, that's going to be it for this interview. Once again, thank you Manat for giving me this chance to actually get your thoughts on the game. Hopefully we can do this again. Hopefully I can do more in the future with other players if I can get a hold of them. If you really want to check out, and I say this just about every video, if you want to check out the actual 7U Discord, if you want to actually get into some games, play with some people, I've got all the links down in the description that you're going to need. Also, the playlist description if you want to watch the 7U battles and everything, the resource hub, the actual Discord link, everything. Until next time, everybody, take care and have a good week.